Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Carl. This is week 8 of this poetry reading series. So we've been in lockdown for that long, and it's going to continue for a little bit longer at least. But so I hope this is providing some entertainment for people as we go through that. So today I'm going to read poems that I wrote when I was living in San Francisco. It was my last full year living in San Francisco, 1997. Although it also includes the first poem that I ever wrote in Hawaii when I came here to visit that summer. Yeah, I guess it was still summer. It was almost fall, but not quite. But before I do that, I wanted to post a correction to what I said. When I read the haiku last week, I was embarrassed to admit that I couldn't remember who I had written the haiku chain with. And I did a little digging in the last week, and I remembered now that it was written with Chris Daniels and Pat Reed over email. We sent each other the haiku over email. So a little bookkeeping to get out of the way. So these poems that I'm going to read today were never collected into a book, but they were read at readings that I gave that year, and also sent out to magazines diligently, and so I got several of them published in magazines, including the magazine that I myself edited, which was called Ontonym. And so this first one is an editorial essay that I wrote for Ontonym, which is called On Ontological Activism. The first two paragraphs were written in 1994, and then the rest was written 3 years later. So it's often pointed to as the oldest and most fundamental complex of questions to occur in human consciousness. Who am I, and what am I doing here? Questions of this type, along with the resources needed to ask them and give them adequate reflection, are increasingly proscribed by the conditions currently structuring much of our daily experience, which ultimately threatens that human consciousness that makes such questioning possible and even necessary. I should point out as an aside that these two paragraphs were written just after Newt Gingrich became the Speaker of the House in 1994, so I was feeling a little apocalyptic. The phrase ontological activism announces itself as the public asking of the questions of being, transforming the individual who am I through reintegration with the communal who are we, in such a way that the opening up of personal perspectives may continually transform the communal as well, by offering examples of investigative strategies. In this way, the question becomes, do we as human beings wish to continue being? And if so, how? Since writing the above outline of one of the ideas I've been giving thought to since I initiated the return of Ontonym in late 1994, I've heard from many people who've responded with creativity and thoughtfulness to it. The synergy that's resulted has led me to think further on some of the issues raised, and I'd like to elaborate a little. Lawrence Fixell, in particular, has been a persistent provider of frameworks that have been useful in fleshing out some themes, and I want to start with one of his triadic glimmerings here. The ontological search in which we're engaged as humans seems to be more thoroughly thought if we think it along the lines of the triad being, becoming, belonging. Each of these elements can be further thought as polarities. Being exists on a spectrum with absolute being or presence on one end and absolute nothingness or absence on the other. Becoming is a polarity with the past at one end and the future on the other, while belonging encompasses a polarity which we can variously call self-other, individual society, or more metaphysically, the desire to separate, and the desire to return. The polarity being/nothingness forms the basis for the leap into what Heidegger calls fundamental ontology. We move from the question, why is there being at all and not nothing, to the founding question of metaphysics, what is being? But I think it's safe to say that metaphysicians are not the only ones who deal with this question, and we all wonder about, ponder upon, and wander through the question and its many corollaries in our own ways. The polarity inherent in becoming, past-future, gets buried early on in Western metaphysics in favor of a being which is immutable, unchanging, and hence not in need of becoming anything. The foregrounding of a process of synthesis in Hegel's dialectic, and later Nietzsche's will to power and eternal return of the same, are examples of attempts to reintegrate being and becoming. The present, in which we exist, is held in a constant state of tension between the past, with its promise of knownness and familiarity and its threat of stagnation, and the future, which offers transformation and possibility, which offers the transformation of possibility into reality, but which can't really be held to its promises. Belonging is a bit more slippery. As we are, as we become, do we belong? If so, where do we belong? Again, we have a spectrum. At one end is my private experience, which none but I can have. Yet I do not seem to be the only being or the only one having experiences. The awareness of an other, of others, the other pole, sets me in motion across the spectrum of belonging as I form relationships with what I am not, in order to find out what I am and what I might become, and withdraw into myself in order to experience my discoveries at that private level where they seem to be mine alone. I experience the desire to separate from these others, to discover my own individuality, and the desire to return to them, to share what I am discovering. Note that these experiences can sometimes surface negatively as well, as alienation, exile, or as codependency. So where do writing and visual art, where does any artistic endeavor at all fit into this scheme? As conduit and medium, art creates a language field, something akin to a world, in which the question of being can there be asked and examined, even as the way in which the question itself is asked is questioned. This is because the language field set up by the work of art can contain the awareness of its own constructed nature and then can mine under that field. We find thereby the nexus, the points of contact between the work's language, the logos of its world, and being itself from which it arises. Activism in this context means simply pursuing this question through artistic creation at a fundamental level, as the more or less direct, insofar as direction has any meaning within the world of the artwork, region to be investigated. As long as the artwork's world forms the experiential nexus, artist and audience alike have the opportunity to witness ontological processes laid bare in, through, and by the artistic process. To take note of this possibility is by no means to privilege the artistic process over any other life process. Art is only one of a myriad of paths by which one can arrive at an experience of the source. Art's unique character will resonate for some and not for others. Activism then, in this context, simply means sending out this unique vibration and letting those who choose to listen respond to it as they will. Why activism then, if not to try to convert those who may have chosen not to listen? Because increasingly the choice itself of whether or not to listen has been diminished by economic, political, and cultural forces whose aim is the commodification of being that would effectively extinguish it. This poem is called Regions 3. Regions 1 and 2 aren't that good, so I'm not going to read them. So I'm just going to skip to the good stuff. If you were abstract, would you be dense and weighty or airy and aloof? Far into the bargain, a word is found stitched to another, weighted with colloquy and plenty. That night it hails them, and in each stone a calling melts into loam. The dogs bury noses in it, but come up puzzled. When the horizon arrives, we'll abide, our casual incessant scarring maps, the spoken word, the written word, the gestured word. Then the cached word, a restraining order, comes clear enough to what? This is another one of those poems I've been reading that are based on viewings of films. This one's called, after the film, 3 Lives and Only One Death. One sole death realized by the main torpor of decor. Paid relations estranged. Set at angles, the mirror's theme. A few yards would suffice. The time eaters much farther away. Anything is too much. The anthropology of negation turns Marcello around. Nothing, like 2 worlds touching. You've forgotten something, darling. So true it can't be kept from returning. No choice anyway. More than 3 lives, more than 1 death. Perjured Gertrude. Stein, presumably. I castigate doubts in myself. I rake leaves off the lawn, and the blister itches for a week because it pleases me scratch. Or, say, the time we were puppy dogs romping around in the grass. I cast about for aspersions, spelunking with extra clothes, even though it's warmer closer to the earth's core. Hilarity in zoos. Once the loud birds grok the dawn, it's over for the light sleepers. If I had never been off my back, you all would seem like part of the sky. Like parts of the sky, like the sky. Like whales telling each other the weather, your chatter sings to me at night and daily. Further contact. How delicately the time falls off planets. Fragile sounds tracking a word covered in graying fire. Facts top a medical view, like shoes forced to consider unfamiliar feet, or bending the solarium to comet's air. I surf the expert dewdrops with a manual displacement which wrecks for the honeybees. The geometric circus of light gardens our yard. This is a metanoetic car. This poem is titled Right Margin. You wouldn't be able to tell from reading it out loud, but it's justified right margin, which makes it look odd. Although I'm not sure there was any other reason I named it that. It's dedicated to John High, who is a San Francisco poet that I was friends with. I haven't heard from him in many years since I moved here. But at the time I wrote this, I was reading his sequence called the Sasha Poems, which were written for his very young, at the time, daughter, which I was very moved by, and so that inspired this 2-part poem. It was published in Rhizome number 2 in 1998. 1. Would truth come to a fence post, or did the ends of contemplation merely fall into disrepair, my darling ghosts? Yet now the appliances everywhere sweetly hum them when I lie down heavy with their sleep. Craters of excitement well up through the Orphic geography, and in falls each note to the score of his song, the fantasy of Eurydice. Now baling wire has its own character. Someone has placed a network of posts inside the wire and thereby made a civilization. I hesitate to say network, but the pattern is a familiar of Mother O's realm somehow. I can't fathom having 7 senses, but it does seem more sensitive out lately, while you, sweet bird tone, wave back away. 2. Call it education of the cults, Chancellor, a boat being rowed beneath this week's scooping moon, prelate of minute abominations which you drown in the wake of your waking, you weak from cancelling out, you color of scholars, you editor of scops. And just hear how doomsday'd ruin it if the reveille uncoiled from your revelatory trumpet, digesting in the chambers. The musicians have swallowed its delivery, unclocked its meter to inhabit untethered its making. This one also requires some explanation before I read it. This poem is called Backflow Prevention Assemblies. It's named after this cool binder that I found in a basket of giveaway stuff on a street in San Francisco, probably in 1997. You can read it more easily on the spine. Presumably that's got something to do with plumbing or something. But I thought it would be a cool title for a poem. The poem is dedicated to another John, John Noto, who was a poet and editor. So at the time I was reading his book Psychomotor Breathscapes, and the magazine that he edited, which was called Orpheus Grid. And I'm kind of doing a parody of his writing style here, but it's done affectionately. I actually liked John a lot, and I thought his poems were really funny, although I'm not sure if he meant them to be funny, but I thought they were great. So this poem and the next poem actually were published in one of the early online poetry magazines, Deluxe Rubber Chicken, and that was published in issue number 2 of that. So. Backflow Prevention Assemblies for John Noto. Propulsed through a meridian's Tai Chi Kundalini buzz, what once described itself as I, your stereotypical bomb-faxing anarchist, new outrageous alien from the planet of flirtatious genitalia, cocky thief and proud possessor of Breton's neglected bullshit detector, set on overload and hidden in the silent abyss of the audience, new tumescent rainstorm of the future. Legitimacy squabble begins its opening up among atonal meat arcs based in southwestern red light havoc. Eyes a googleplex of marvelous gigabyte marks straining against the palette flash, derived from the 256 colors of Avalon ballrooming in your ocular capturing software. Who's the dame with the classy chassis? The wine lay loaded in the bowl. So, spurred forward by grammar, our hero is plunged into central nervous syzygy. Bookish alignment throughout the spine. Planet of the primates has landed today. I relinquish the delinquent. Talk and tale turns. Being disappeared in Disneyland's penal system. Another fast brother whacked by the mouse. Deltoid spasm. Some barrel of insomniac monkeys and their devious meditation. Public service with a smile. If only viruses and germs could be trained to obey our bidding. That's what they're thinking. Did you know drill instructors barked? It's a catastrophic range. Forced apart the tenure of our disastrous ecology, but has anyone explored the etymological connection between crisis and critic? a scooping media patterned after frenzy, science on the fly, at the helm, cyber, a tension bridge spanning two fictions, crisscrossing to indicate self-awareness. This is an epistolary poem. It's called Love Evolving Bureaucrat. Dear, oh dear, my flesh-colored mirror, you can't do anything except you don't have to yell immediately. St. Louis view, S, cradle arms, VT, language, DO, respect. Sunset debris, the drums of irony scavenge the nightmares of omniscience. I wanted to say omnipotence's nightmares, but went with it. What I mean is the cultural effluvium processed by massed media. What I mean is the social role many blanks are taking on themselves. When their dream is the world's nightmare, we will be there like vultures to shock them in their dream, until they harmonize the oniric essence or decide never to close eyes again. Dear Odin, never met a soul who'd rather be a phantom than an apparition. We're partitioned by the nightstand of late, and set to auto-transmit, if you must know. Each unique communique a closering of blank. Love evolving bureaucrat. P.S. You've truly yet to see love kick through the land. This one's called Umbilical Tension. Our elliptical epoch unscrews itself, threading property all through the pops. The L's and the R's fluoresce in the bus's crepuscular headlights. Nested Zen bites trumpet a case of skin failure. The Mecca's really packing them in. An empire of transfers limbed out of blacktop and hybris. Wiry arboretums of fog hassle the downtown trains of the lumbar joyride, soaked in windows glowing ER blue. I mind my own business as conspicuous as possible. Ashtanga yoked to a notion of grooves. An ocean of graves, accented acutely and flexed around the soundscape. The world is imperiled, etc. The noise of wanting out. A prominent emotive outcropping is there. Fictitious epiphanies gain their numinous weight, preserving the civil static. That was published in Art Access Volume 3, Number 8 in April of 1999. Woohoo! So that September 1997, I took a trip to Honolulu, where I met the love of my life. And I wrote this poem when I rode the bus that goes all the way around the island of Oahu, and I got off at Temple Valley and went to the Buddhist temple and rang the bell in there, and then got back on the bus and went the rest of the way around back to the hotel. So it's called Byodo-In, after the temple. Called to mind by bird flurries, returning to the quiet heart of the ring-ing bell, step still among forebears' variants, and sun's rays of no mere cinema downstream from the stratic clouds. Low-intensity poetry. Belief that everything is in process of being explained in words, threatened by words' refusal to first of all explain themselves. crossed out, sequent refusals or failures of their author to do so, then backlash, crackdown, brandishing of fasces. Outside, the trains don't run on time, except the ones that run us inside. Execution as a carrying out comes to connote killing, as this is what can be borne away with mercurial efficiency. Kilometers of careful restitution. They're substituting their own private reservations. The internment district where the ocean pockets the sun entire like a penny, a settler sun impendent. And the tired go to sum themselves up for encapsulation. But paralleler droves, argent, no grim prism natives. Both speakers said peach in place of their betrothed words. They urged an elemental audition, tantamount to a glottal stop, the unlettered signature of the sublime. A racingly worded compass of passion extrudes a plotted pace de trop. You grasp a swim under Voudun visibility and cast a gated glare with solar phrasing. Let the process still itself, a trochee if it wishes. Pure phonics at first, but what of water in transit? Vocal archipelagos, sonic puppetry, a state of space, and then whammo, literacy. Low-intensity poetry ripples the populace, having at the last, and first of all, lost its name. History lessened. This book will mirror your alloyed years, niching the death of interim integrities and slight land beings, the dendritic halting walk of the renewed friendships of our winter. The leisure of this book has me in an easterly line of still-worked men and thrift store festschrift. An angry sun shone over weeks of flotsam. Ovarian aims all eyed their solar victimage, an element of earnest begetting which their riches once bought. At the onslaught of a ruptured touch, the sacking of the airmen's school stood sundered. August jarred the organs like an unending floss drawn across the year. We none, why no one in the outback houseboat? The arty way to be volunteered all undone and a gag beginning, linked over links to sick nights learning light errands and the grist of grab. The elephantine medium, suggesting a rural cartography of available plumb lines. One's conjectured lawn of basal metaphors challenges the perpetuity of detective stepping stones that paved the Tao for context. The buildup of linen makes the laundromat liquid. Easel incantation, the breezy wielding of theory, paints a glutinous figure of an ex-impressionist. Continuing to validate the ailing loggerheads, the citer of bears alights. You zero in on nothing. That one was in the End Review number 1 in August of 1998. If I can get the page turned. Palette flash. The energy of a spiral on the page, physiological and acoustic. The glassworks torment absence into forgetlessness. Are we to expand or withdraw into sleep? Go echo an open apostrophe, pausing for skeletal scarcity, an adjournment of the invincible that had wasted those tiny inward volcanoes. The strongest mountain of your return I must have met, the incurable swarm of Daphnis. Here we might be marked as A, different, B, non-different, C, coursing through the blood. Flush with the rhythm of fruition, physical reality is the resolution of love. That one appeared in Melodeon #1 in spring of 1998. And I will finish with Phantom of the Obvious. It's a thought I'd blow away in the next Tibetan wind, but then my affect is not so ungraven. Only the air chambers remain, red wire sets stretching out to run a hearing test on doors ajar, seeing if it's safe to make my shell a vessel for kinetic treasure houses that open out around me if time collides with its time, like cells love water. All Asia says wait for a way to working wonder is in order. Moondark, even my dream ego waits. An hour in the early times. As you know, the goddess of the moon was initially Dutch. She doesn't mistake trust for a gun's chime. Triggered, a word string, this continuous tremolo. Contingency dislocates the plan, rather charters that scenario as a call for its own vehicle. Arrive at redefine. Aragnus, being held in being by being. This holding is belonging, the bringing into belongingness. Translation. Appropriation, what then is appropriate? Phantom of the obvious, tolling parasympathetic vespers. Thank you. For today. So Dan has a question. Let me scroll all the way down so I can see the whole thing. Whatever happened to Antonym? Obviously you haven't published one in forever, but I don't recall you ever mentioning back then that you were ceasing publication. Yeah, I think what happened was I moved here, and then I had other things going on that were more interesting. So, so yeah, I just kind of went on indefinite hiatus, which is still on. So, yeah. It didn't seem as urgent anymore, and I was having all kinds of new experiences here, and I didn't want to do the work anymore. So the work to payoff ratio went down. So that's why Antonym hasn't come back since then. So I think that's it for this week, and I hope everybody had fun. I had fun, and we'll probably see you next week. Bye, everybody. Thank you for listening and watching.